Okay, so do find people here weren't here last week, but for those who attended last week, we had talked about Article 1 of the Constitution. We talked about the Supremacy Clause, correct? Okay, and we may or may not have talked about cows, or let's say taking cows, right? Now, hey, welcome. Take a seat. We're just getting started. Okay, so this week we're going to continue on talking about the limits that we imposed upon the government within the Constitution and what our founding fathers intended by certain, to understand their idea of liberty and a free government, okay? It is very different from how it is today. Last week we talked about our government supreme or Allah supreme, right? We talked about the meaning of law, the true meaning of law, right? How laws are just not simply the commands of men, but that they are conformable to the will of God himself or the laws of nature, all right? So in other words, laws are not just whatever Governor Doug Ducey says, or it's not that at all, or whatever the legislator says, or whatever the jury says, or the judicial branch says, but it is an expression of the law of nature itself, okay? That, is it right for men to steal? Is it right for men to murder? Of course not. So we have laws and restrictions in place to punish those who violate our own rights, okay? Now, we talked about how when we take a government and we begin to make it supreme, that this is, according to our founding fathers, the treason against the sovereignty, treason against ourselves, treason against what it means to have a free government. And then when you can see how this is done today, when the people in the federal government or any government, state government whatsoever, outstep their bounds as prescribed within the Constitution, right? So if I grant Jerem the ability to distribute pencils that I give to him, it doesn't mean he can just all of a sudden make a law unto himself and begin distributing, ballpoint pens or expo markers, because that was never given to him. Likewise, we give no such authority for government to suspend our rights to assemble, our rights to worship or to gather in temples, okay? Regardless of the situation. Hey, how's it going?
Doing good.
Okay, that's just an example. Now, how are governments made supreme? Well, we're going to figure that out. Is our federal government, how can we tell if a government makes itself supreme or not? Okay, so we're going to go, and what was your name?
Ed.
Ed? I think I've seen you around here. This is our last week. We're going over the constitutional limits. Okay, so we have here at the very top, in Article 1, Section 8, one of the clauses that gives Congress the power to declare war. Okay, we're going to get into the powers of Congress or of the government to, what it means to have that power, what it means for them to have an army or a militia. Okay, let's go ahead. Who wants to read this quote by William Rowell, one of the founding fathers? We'll have, what was your name?
Ed.
Ed, thank you. Ed, go ahead.
The rights of using force or of making war belongs to nations, so far as it is necessary for their defense, and the support of their rights.
Okay, stop right there. I'm gonna stop you, not because you're doing bad, but because I want to make sure we're understanding. So, the right of using force or of making war, okay, so he's talking about war-making powers, belongs to nations. Okay? Do we remember last week, for those who were here, what is implied in the word of Congress? I know a few of you weren't here, but for those who were here, Congress, what does that mean? Okay, let's read. Jerry, you want to read this?
word Congress was a precise word used to express a congregation of deputies from independent states or governments, as well as to that of distinct kingdoms.
Okay, so the word Congress implied in the very meaning of the word separate nations. Okay, so when William Rowell, one of the founding fathers, says the right of using force or making war belongs to nations, he's referring to Congress assembled. Okay, now that doesn't mean that the states necessarily can't do that themselves, but here we understand the idea that Congress has the power to declare war, not the single will of the president, right? We'll read that later here. Let's continue. Ed, right? So, but the evils.
But the evils of war are certain, and the events doubtful, and therefore both wisdom and humanity require that every possible precaution should be used before a nation is plunged into it.
Okay, so he's just saying there that war is undesirable, right? We do not delight in bloodshed. So it's in Congress, the deliberation of nations, that this should be, of course, considered because war has a very heavy weight to it, okay? Let's keep going.
Let's see.
In monarchies.
In monarchies, the king generally possesses this power, and it is as often exercised for his own aggrandizement as for the good of the nation. Republics, though they cannot be wholly exonerated from the impulsive
The imputation.
imputation of ambition, jealousies, causeless irritations, and other personal passions, enter into war more deliberately and reluctantly.
Okay, so what point is he making there?
While a monarch is likely to go into war because he wants to,
Hmm?
a republic has more thought going behind it.
Right. So he's explaining the fact in history that when one man often possesses the sole authority to make war, that's often abused to fulfill his own will or to fulfill the desires of his party, right? Okay? We can see this today with the NDAA Act that has always been passed in Congress. Congress defied the Constitution and gives president somehow an extra constitutional authority to make war with whom he will for the sake of national security, for the war on terror. President can right now just say, hey, when was the last time, does anyone know, when was the last time that Congress declared war?
World War II.
And how many wars have there been since?
Korean, Vietnam, Iraq, Iran.
Afghanistan.
Okay? And
Besides other military adventures in Central America.
right. So we can see the obvious problem in that, right? What we're spending trillions in dollars every year, or billion, I'm not sure the exact amount, but it's up there. Endless and ceaseless war by the sole authority of one person because, let's blow up them Iraqis, right? Or what reason is there? Now, if you investigate that, you might uncover answers you might not like, right? Because evil's been perpetuated by both parties regardless, right? And this is absolutely, according to William Rowell, a state of tyranny, right? Our Congress, our deputies, the subordinate officers that the states send to Congress are the only ones that should have the authority to deliberate war, whether or not to enter into it or not. Okay? but this does not mean we give authority to anyone else. Okay? So we can see right there, do we understand that? This idea of the president is not the commander-in-chief of the military whenever he wants to be. Okay? And we can read that in the next part. Okay? The president, or who wants to read this next? This is in Article 2 now, listing the powers of the president. Okay? Who wants to read the top quote? Go ahead.
The President shall be Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy of the United States and of the militia of the several states, when called into the actual service of the United States.
Okay? So when is the president commander-in-chief?
Always.
Well, no.
Well, I guess in those days, they didn't have a standing army.
Right.
That's a no.
That we'll get into that. But when is now he's always, right? But
Yeah.
how is it written? How is it according to law?
When called into the actual service of the United States.
Okay?
So when there's a need for it.
When it's right to declare war, or as the other clauses say, to repel invasions or to suppress insurrections. Okay? That only then is the commander-in-chief. The Congress has to first say, hey, you are now commander-in-chief of these armies, okay? Which we give you, right? So now it's the other way around, right? States have no say whatsoever in whether or not to engage in a war. It's whatever the president says or wills, okay? So the president's only commander-in-chief of the army when called in the actual service of the United States. Let's go ahead and read St. George Tucker's. He's one of the prominent teachers of the Constitution during that era of the Founding Fathers. One of the Founding Fathers. So go ahead. Who wants to read this quote? This thought. St. George Tucker. Jeremy.
The president cannot make rules for the regulation and government of the Army and Navy himself, but they must be governed according to the regulations established by Congress. The militia of the several states, though subject to his command when called into actual service, can only be called into service by the authority of Congress. It must be governed according to law.
Okay. Now, was that simple enough to understand? How can we see this not follow today? Or how is this maybe different from what you thought?
It's interesting how the president cannot regulate the Army and Navy, but it's Congress who does so.
Let's see
So,
here. Yeah, cannot make rules for the regulation. So, whatever the president does, he is not superior, right? It's this whole idea of what is superior. Is government, the station, the authority superior? Or is the law which governs the authority, which is superior? Is it, who is master and who is servant, right? So, in this case, it's Congress who prescribes those rules and regulation according to law, according to the Constitution, right? So, with this knowledge, we can see we're in a very precarious state today because, well, let's understand the word militia. What does the word militia imply? Do we know? Hey, how's it going?
Is that the same term they use in the Second Amendment?
Yeah. Yep.
My recollection is that a militia is made up of all the citizens and resident aliens of military age.
It is how the founding fathers would explain it is a civilian soldiery, right?
Yeah.
Now, the government may have the ability to call forth an army, but chiefly, the primary strength of our army should be within the citizens themselves, right? The militia, okay? Why do you think a militia would be important to maintain in a free country as opposed to just a standing army which is continually employed and is in service to the government? Why must we be armed ourselves? Yes.
Well, if we're talking about kind of how like gun violence is right now
Mhm.
and how people are bringing up that the people shouldn't have guns and things,
Mhm.
people need to have guns because the bad people will get guns.
Mhm.
And if we ourselves are not armed, then we're basically pushovers.
Right.
And one of the first things that they did when Nazi Germany was taking over is they took away their weapons. They're like, oh no, wait, you don't need weapons, and then they don't have weapons, they can't fight back.
You have to remember who's the sovereignty, right? According to St. George Tucker, right? That we read, right? That in the United States of America, the people have retained the sovereignty or the supreme authority, right? So when we allow our masters, right? Not really, to extract trillions of dollars from us, to establish their own military government without end, and then to strip away our own arms and to say, no, you can't be more powerful than us. That creates a very pressing issue. Because that's how governments become supreme and not the law, right? So the militia is not just, oh, I have a pistol. No, it's, I have military grade weapons. I have to be at least as equal to the armies of the federal government. Because what happens if they're superior, right? And I'm not just making this up. This is what they said themselves. Let's go ahead. This is George Mason. This is taken from the debates of the Constitution. They were worried. George Mason was an anti-federalist. He was worried that, the Constitution would eventually lead to a government like we have today, right, where standing armies are ever so prevalent. So let's go ahead and read what George Mason said.
I'll read it.
Go ahead.
No man has greater regard for the military gentlemen than I have. Admire their intrepidity, perseverance, and valor. But once a strong standing army is established in any country, the people lose their liberty, when against a regular and disciplined army,
Yeomanry. It's like common civilian soldiers.
Okay, are the only defense. Yeomanry's unskillful and unarmed, what chance is there for preserving freedom?
Okay, stop. So what is the evil he's speaking of? What is it he wants to avoid?
Standing army.
Okay. So how can we see a standing army today?
Well, don't we have a giant military training program where you go and get militarily trained?
And who's the employer?
The government.
Right? So who is it that serve, right? So not only that, now I'm not saying we don't need policing, but our own police receive, millions, billions of dollars of funding from the DHS to have tanks or military grade weapons. So they're not serving necessarily the people, but the will of those who are in power. And I'm not saying we shouldn't have people to protect us, but it has to be done right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Do we allow ourselves to become lazy and irresponsible or even, afraid of that responsibility. Like, I don't want to have any guns. I don't want that responsibility. I'm going to shove that onto the people who I put in power. But what's the danger then? Why not? Why a standing army? Why not? What happens when we allow those in power to have a standing army?
They abuse that power.
What's from stopping them from then saying, oh, income tax, that's a thing now, right? Even though that's something that the founding fathers.
Originally, did not written.
What's that?
Originally, did not written the Constitution.
Right, they can now become a law unto themselves. They can exercise unrighteous dominion. Okay, because the thing that's always been done since the beginning of mankind has been to, 1, get control of the money, and 2, get control of the army. If you have those 2 things, you can do whatever you want. That was something, what was it? I can't recall exactly the name, but the prototypical tyrant of Greece. So what he did, he got control of the gold mines, and then with that power, he could command armies without end to impose his own will on the people. But when we decentralize that, when we give the power of the army back to the people, prevents that same evil. Now you might think that exposes us to a bunch of to chaos, but that's not so. Let's go ahead and keep reading here. So I think we left off here.
Give me leave to recur to the page of history. Do warn you of your present danger. Recollect the history of most nations of the world. What havoc, desolation, and destruction have been perpetrated by standing armies.
Okay. Let's keep going. The quote doesn't end there.
An instance within the memory of some of the house will show us how our militia may be destroyed. 40 years ago, when the resolution of enslaving America was formed in Great Britain, the British Parliament was advised by an artful man, who was governor of Pennsylvania, to disarm the people. That it was the best and most effectual way to enslave them, but they should not do it openly, but weaken them and let them sink gradually, but totally discussing.
But by totally disusing?
By disusing, neglecting, and the militia.
Okay, we'll stop right there. So what was the artful and evil plan of the British Parliament?
Take the guns away from the people.
Right. To disarm the people, that it was the best and most effectual way to enslave them to their authority and their power, right? Because as soon as you take away the sovereignty of the people, then you become the sovereignty, right? And that constitutes a total state of tyranny and usurpation, and that is not a sign of a free people, okay? And how is this done? It wasn't done all at once, right? It wasn't done so openly, right? But it was done gradually. We'll take away automatic weapons. We'll take away extended magazines. Now we'll restrict,
Outlaw bullets.
Yeah, we'll regulate the market, so now bullets are less available.
I mean, it's other weapons too.
Another one, not like.
There's lots of regulations against certain blades and all kinds of weapons that you.
Yeah, depending on your state, right? So states have made themselves instruments of tyranny, right? Probably because it's the culture, right, that we now live in. That government's now supreme instead of the law. So these men who we appoint are leaders. We should not be having reasonable regulations, right? Because is it reasonable to allow the people who are supposed to be our servants tell us that, hey, now they prescribe rules for us on how to defend ourselves. I don't think that's very reasonable. Now you might think that's a huge safety reason, but there never was safety, truly safety in a state of freedom, okay?
In fact, it's more unsafe to not have, like, access to a weapon if you needed it.
Right, I mean, what was his
Argument
name?
for safety is a very, very dangerous route.
Right,
Because safety is locked in a room, padded in foam, and not going anywhere.
That's how you get mentally messed up.
it's as Thomas Jefferson said, I prefer dangerous freedom over peaceful slavery. He might have said it a little differently, but that idea was gotten from David Hume, who was a historian on Great Britain. He noted that once, Rome came in, enslaved the Britons, and civilized them, but did so what he called a peaceful slavery, right? He made them civilized, but they also debased them. And then once Rome fell, the Britons were no longer capable of defending themselves or their freedom. So our own responsibility to be free, to be responsible, and to be powerful chiefly relies on our ability to defend ourselves. And if we can't defend ourselves if we are not armed. Okay, so the evil, most effectual way to enslave them was not to do it openly, but to weaken them and let them sink gradually by totally disusing and neglecting the militia. Oh, the militia doesn't mean, now that could be today, the militia, that's just, those wackos who have assault rifles, and that's not the militia, right? Right, now we're gonna let you have pistols and stuff, but the militia, the army, so-called, they're the ones that have the power. Let's neglect and disuse the militia. We're now just going to use our standing army instead. Our permanently employed army. Now here Mr. Mason quoted sundry passages to this effect, meaning he listed more and more and more. He eventually says here, you want to continue reading?
Mhm.
This was
the most iniquitous project. Why should we not provide against the danger of having our militia, our real and natural strength destroyed?
Okay. So the real and natural strength of the nation is in the militia, not in permanently employed standing armies of the government. Okay. Now, like Mr. Mason said, okay, I'm not trying to disrespect military gentlemen, right? But I'm just trying to show that our trend of power is very dangerous and is continuously abused today. And not only that, but it makes us look upon, as Hamilton said, the army as our superiors. Okay? We must do whatever the government does, and there's no recourse. Why? Because we can't. If we don't pay our income tax, the federal agents are going to pound down our door. Okay? That now, whatever they exact from us must be given. All right? Now, we have to be prudent, right? Because the powers which we live under today, we don't want to, well, bid me leave on that note. Let's discuss the solutions as we go on in the lesson, because we will get there. Okay, so this is now Mr. Madison, James Madison, the primary writer of the Constitution, or the father of the Constitution. Okay, what in Madison's mind signals the end of a free country? Okay, who wants to read this? This is from Federalist 46, Federalist Papers. So this was Madison's response to people like George Mason, who thought that it would be the destiny of the government by the Constitution, that it would eventually create a standing army. What was Mr. Madison's, let's go ahead and read what he thought. What signals the end of a free republic? Okay, who wants to read this? Go ahead.
The only refuge left for those who prophesy the downfall of the state governments is the visionary supposition that the federal government may previously accumulate a military force for projects of ambition.
Okay, so he's addressing the concern of what? So he's saying that those who suppose that the state governments, that the federal government become centralized, consolidated, and that a single nation shall arise, that the state government shall ultimately be overthrown. What was in the way of that? A military force for projects of ambition, right? So he's saying the end of a republic of separate nations coming together, the signal of that is a military force, and a standing military force for the projects of ambition, right? Gotta get the oil or whatnot. Gotta prevent terrorism, which is really just, we have to pay government, you have to pay private companies millions of billions of dollars, defense contracts, okay? But, do we understand this? Pretty clear cut. Okay, so Madison's saying that the last thing, the ultimate thing that would destroy is a standing army. This destroy the free nation. Okay, let's go on. This is continuing the quote. So he's saying, how would this come to pass? How would the federal government create a standing army? How would we go so far away from having the sovereignty within the people? Okay, let's read what would have happened for that evil to come to pass. Let's read. Who wants to read?
I'll continue.
Okay, go ahead.
That the people and the states should for a sufficient period of time let an uninterrupted succession of men ready to betray bold.
Okay, stop. So, the first thing that would signal the end of the republic and to signal in the start of a national government of consolidated power and of a standing army would be to what? That the people and the state should put into power those who are ready to betray both, to betray the people and the states, to betray the Constitution. Okay? And now today,
Right, because if you only cater to the people, then the people will push you around and you'll end up with all of these weird laws that make absolutely no sense. And if you cater to the states, then you'll end up restricting the people, which doesn't make sense. So you have to use your judgment and be like, that's not a good idea. That's not a good idea. And then pick and choose the suggestions that work nicely for the situation.
according to the laws of
Right.
the Constitution, according to the laws of
Right,
nature,
exactly.
right?
Because both the states and the people will try to push those laws back and try to be like, oh no, it's just slightly over that line. No, the line's here. You don't cross that.
Right. And more particular here, the response, so he's saying that, if we were to start electing people who would support the power of the federal government, who would support the idea of standing armies or a militarized police state, that this is ultimately a betrayal to our country, to our states, right? That the traitors, so let's keep going.
That the traitors should, throughout this period, uniformly and systematically pursue some fixed plan for the extension of the military establishment.
Okay, stop. So what he's saying here is that all these people who we put into power, they will what? Continually renew and expand the power of the federal government. The NDAA has not been suspended. In fact, it has been expanded. The NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, which gives power to the president to declare a war and have standing army whenever and whenever he wants. Okay? So that's a very big issue, right? And regardless of party, it has never been repealed, it's never been vetoed. In fact, our own American people say, yes, sort them out, right? Blow them up, okay? Or, you know, let's expand our police force. We're already giving them tanks and infantry vehicles, and okay, and now look at ourselves. Keep going.
That the governments and the people of the states should silently and patiently behold the gathering storm, and continue to supply the materials until it should be prepared to burst on their own heads.
Stop. Okay. So now he's saying that, oh, once we see these things happening, that we should just patiently forbear these things, continue to supply the materials, meaning supplying votes maybe, supplying our funds, our support to these people. Behold the gathering storm, right? Oh, well, next year we'll vote them out. Okay? This whole idea, what must appear to everyone in the House, he's to the Founding Fathers, but this whole supposition that this would happen must appear to everyone more like the incoherent dreams of a delirious jealousy or the misguided exaggerations of a counterfeit zeal than like the sober apprehensions of genuine patriotism. He's saying that if this were to come to pass, that's so ridiculous. The American people would never, ever elect an uninterrupted succession of men ready to betray the Constitution or the laws. That the traitors, that we should allow the traitors throughout this period to uniformly and systematically pursue some fixed plan for the military establishment, that they may have power over us. That the governments and the people of the state should silently and patiently behold the gathering storm and wait for it to burst. Okay, that's not our call as citizens. Okay, what then is the solution? I've offered no. Well, let's keep going.
Well, if you look at it in that light of like a succession of people who are themselves trying to push the powers of the law and the people and things on it, we've almost had that. Like with our presidents, a straight up succession of just president after president who's just pushing the laws. Cause
I would say
one does
that,
it,
yeah.
And they push it a little bit, and then the next one can go, oh, well, the previous president did this, so I must be able to as well. And then just push it a little bit further and a little bit further till now the president has way too much power, and it's not constitutional.
I'd actually just assert that. I wouldn't say it probably has happened. I would say it has happened. Not only that, but because of time, I haven't talked about executive orders. But there's no such power granted in the Constitution for that.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
What president do you think started the succession
Of what?
of like,
Executive orders?
people pushing things?
Well, you'd be surprised. It started way with George Washington. Surprisingly. You know, you have the Whiskey Rebellion. you have John Adams pushing the Alien Sedition Acts, unconstitutional. You have Abraham Lincoln suspending habeas corpus. So these men that we love, right? I mean, we have to recognize, it'd be so much better for us to recognize the people in power as, or that the people who we elect to be our servants. How much better would we be off if we regarded them as how they are, men? Okay? Not that I hate George Washington or John Adams, but we should recognize that if we are no longer vigilant, if we no longer hold these people accountable, that they quickly just
Right.
exercise their own authority.
It's like they hate the president when they're in office, and the moment they're out of office, it's like, okay, we don't care anymore. Like, what's done is done, you're gone, great, let's get the next person in and hate them.
It's like what St. Paul said, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, okay? But we wrestle against powers, principalities, authorities, a spiritual darkness in high places, right? So it's not that we war against men, it's that we war against power, which Satan puts in the hearts of men, okay? So how much better would it be for us to regard people who we put in positions of servitude if we regard them as just that we saw them as people more tempted to be tyrants. Okay? They are not gods, they are not
Recognize that they are people, and that while that they are there, they are to err.
right.
And we need to make sure that they don't.
Right. Exactly. Okay. Let's talk about how should we fix these issues if they were to occur? What recourse would we have as a people to repel these dangers? Right? Let's suppose, in Madison's terms, let's suppose this were to come to pass. Let's suppose that government has become supreme and that there is an uninterrupted succession of abuse. What do we have? What can we do as a people, right? Let's go ahead and read what Madison said. What is our responsibility as citizens? Who wants to do it?
I can read it.
Go ahead.
On the other hand, should an unwarrantable measure of the federal government be unpopular in particular states, or even warrantable measure be so?
Okay. Sorry. So he's saying, should an unconstitutional act be passed, or even maybe a constitutional one that the states don't agree with? What means of opposition do we have? Go ahead. The means?
The means of opposition to it are powerful and at hand.
Okay. So what does powerful and at hand mean? Available, right? So he's saying the means of opposition to federal abuse or governmental abuse are powerful and at hand. They are available. They're given to us by God. They're there for us to take or not. Okay? What are the powers then?
The disquieted of the people, their repugnance and perhaps refusal to cooperate with the officers of the Union.
Whoa, wait. What?
It's us.
Their repugnance and perhaps refusal to cooperate with the officers of the Union. What happened to thou shalt be, we believe in being subject to kings and priests, or, presence, magistrates, right? Is Madison saying not to do that? No, because as he would have understood it, if a president goes outside of his own bounds of authority,
Then we're not under that authority.
then they act as a man and not as a president. And most importantly, right, what's the ending phrase in that article of faith? To be
Honoring, obeying, sustaining the law.
So that has supremacy over everything else, right? Remember, Christ is the legislator of everyone, even those men who are in positions of authority, okay? So we are very powerful in our hand to refuse to cooperate with the officers of the Union to measures which we view as abuses, constitutional or otherwise. Let's keep going.
The frowns of the executive
Magistracy. So the executive magistracy, meaning, the state, executive branches, the state governments. So the frowns of the state governments, okay, keep going.
They would be signals of general alarm. Every government would espouse the common cause.
Okay, what common cause is he referring to?
The common cause of their rebellion.
Of their desire to be free from the abuses of the federal government, right?
Yeah.
So when we rejoice and say, hey, the Supreme Court has granted us the right to decide for ourselves whether or not abortion should be made available, we should not be rejoicing and saying, hey, why haven't our states refused to cooperate with that measure in the first place? Why haven't the states espoused the common cause? Because we don't view it that way. We don't hold our representatives accountable that way. No one understands it that way because we have gone so far off the track. A correspondence would be opened. So now, you have the particular states conspiring together, so to speak. Because aren't they the masters of the federal government in the first place?
True.
Mm-hmm.
Nope, not so today, but,
Well, people are supposed to be, not
Right.
necessarily the states.
right, so let's keep going.
Plans of resistance would be
Concerted, meaning,
Enacted
yeah,
and
planned and put forth, right?
One spirit would animate conduct the whole. The same combinations, in short, would result in an apprehension of the federal.
Yeah, let's keep going, sorry.
As was produced by the dread of a foreign yoke.
Okay, so he's comparing our own, he's trying to make reference to the Revolutionary War for Independence. No different is the situation for us today, right? So we ought to have the same recourse that the colonies had in refusing to cooperate with the king, as now we should today have the same ability and power to combine to refuse the power of a federal one, right? No different than if we were trying to expel the abuses of a foreign power. Okay? And interesting how they regarded, federal officers as enemies if they outstepped their bounds.
I mean, they kind of turn into one.
Yeah,
Get drunk with power, go overboard. Like, no, you're done.
those, we ought to regard, anyone who seeks to, by force, to accumulate power, we ought to regard as enemies, no different than Captain Moroni was commanded to by God. And if they don't repent of their sins, well then we must do what Madison would have us do, what the Lord would have us do, to go to battle against them. Now we must be prudent in that, right? Because we don't want to just end our plan in imprisonment, but we ought to start concerting our plans of resistance carefully so it's successful. Okay? But what degree of madness could ever drive the federal government to such an extremity?
Of course.
So this would never come to pass. In Madison's mind, he had great faith in us that,
We threw that out the window.
well, it's a very solemn thought, isn't it?
The thing about this is like, it's not very practical anymore to do this.
Well, it starts small.
Well, cause let's say last year on January 6th, a bunch of people peacefully gathered on the
Capitol.
steps of the Capitol building.
Right.
You know, and like eventually some violence broke out, and certainly people did things that they weren't supposed to do. But even people who were just at the building, they didn't go inside, they didn't participate in any violence. They're getting targeted and they're getting thrown in jail just for being there.
I think
And so nowadays, it's like any notion, any plan to rebel because the government's become such a supreme force, it's just met with imprisonment. And if they could, they would imprison every person that even showed up, if they could.
well, the causes of liberty have never been practical, right? I mean, look, the king man,
Let's be free.
Right.
it's an act of faith. Okay? It's gonna have consequences. But we ought to start teaching this to others. Start studying, start planning our resistance. Teach our children, soon children, right? These things. And they'll teach their children these things. It's prophesied by the Lord that there will be a group of brave, covenanted men and women, right? It might not be practical, and yes, I would say that's logical. It might not be practical to the ways of our life, but
I go so as far as say it will not be practical.
but is it the right thing to do? Now that's for yourself to answer, because it's a question of faith, right? Because it's the same spirit of liberty that is Christ, right? And
And if I may add something, as always, freedom is built upon the sacrifice and blood that builds the temple.
And not only that, but remember the reason why the Lord suffers the righteous to be oppressed, right? So that his justice may be unleashed, right? Freely and without excuse. So, I mean, think about Sidney, Algernon Sidney, who wrote that Discourses Concerning Government book, which I quoted from, right? That undermined the authority of the King of England. What was his reward? Death, right? It wasn't very practical for him. And I'm not saying we will die, but we have to be ready to give up our lives and cause and honors for this purpose.
Ready
right?
to take it all the way and not just, oh, consequences are happening. I guess I'll just pull back.
Yes.
Nothing gets done if you have that mentality. You have to be ready to take it to the end no matter what ends up happening along the way.
Right. There will be those, even amongst ourselves, who will discourage us and put us down, but that's why it's an act of faith, because it depends on how you understand the will of the Lord, and that is liberty, and that men ought to be free, and that we ought not to be in bondage one to another. All right, so we have here basically a reiteration of the same ideas by Madison and by Jefferson, that when we have people in power that are making usurpations, that we ought to and are duty bound to stand in the way to arrest the progress of evil. We are duty bound to resist, okay? Because it is evil, right? And we ought to be free. And then Jefferson says here in a much more logical way that the states ought to be the guardian of of, federal abuse from their people in the states to nullify or to make nothing the abuses and edicts of the federal government if they are so abusive, right? To make nothing. Same principle applies for us. We ought to try to make nothing, nullify, powers, that usurp on our liberties and on our Constitution. Captain Moroni's solution to an abusive power was to write Pahoran, who he's supposed to be a tyrant, even though he's mistaken, but we can still read Alma 60 as an eye to truth, right? His attitude towards unrighteous and rebelling, in fact, treasonous governors. What was his solution? I will come unto you, and if there be any among you that has a desire for freedom, so I will come unto you, Pahoran, governor of the land. I will come to you, and yea, if there be even a spark of freedom remaining, behold, I will stir up insurrections among you, even until those who have desires to usurp power and authority shall become extinct. Now we realize why it's important for us to be powerful and armed, right? I don't think we can do that today. Yea, behold, at least we have a struggle before us to regain that. Yea, behold, I do not fear your power nor your authority, but it is my God whom I fear, and it is according to his commandments that I do take my sword to defend the cause of my country. And it is because of your iniquity, Pahoran, that we have suffered so much loss. Ye know that ye do transgress the laws of God, and ye do know that ye do trample them under your feet. You know the limits of your authority, governor, president, representative, and you have trampled them under your feet. You know the limits of your authority is prescribed by the Constitution. Behold, the Lord saith unto me, if those whom ye have appointed your governors do not repent of their sins and iniquities in regards to their desires and wills to usurp power and authority over us, to outstep their bounds prescribed by the laws of the land, ye shall go up to battle against them, and now behold, I, Moroni, am constrained according to the covenant that I have made with God to keep his commandments. Therefore, I would that you should adhere to the word of God. Now we know that Pahoran wasn't desirous for, at least according to what we know, right? There's a rebellion going on in Zarahemla that made him unable to provide, but the principles are still the same. Why would Mormon include that letter for us in these latter days when he saw that we would have the similar situation, right? Think about it like that. Okay, we're almost done. But let's finalize this. I promise I won't go too much over. This is the will of the Lord for us today, right? Dad, do you want to read this?
I can't read these.
Oh.
Distance.
Ed, right?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Thus will I liken the children of Zion. I let them
Importune. Seek for redress. Okay?
at the feet of the judge. And if he heed them not, let them importune at the feet of the governor. And if the governor heed them not, let them importune at the feet of the president. And if the president heed them not, then will the Lord arise and come forth out of his hiding place, and in his fury vex the nation, and in his hot displeasure, and in his fierce anger, in his time he will cut off those wicked, unfaithful, and unjust stewards.
Who is he calling unfaithful, wicked, and unjust stewards?
The whole country.
And the people
Leading
in power.
I say leading, not in power,
R-
because they shouldn't be in power.
Right, well they suppose they lead, right? Okay. And what he will do?
Let's see.
And appoint them.
And appoint them, they'll portion among hypocrites and unbelievers. What I have said unto you
Must.
needs be, that all men may be left without excuse, that wise men and rulers may hear and know that which they have never considered.
Stop. I don't think they really have heard or considered today these things which I'm saying. So what is the Lord saying?
And most of them are atheists. So they
Well,
don't even.
regardless,
Right.
you should still make sure they know their consequence if they do not grant them unto mine epistle, as Moroni said. If you do not grant according to my epistle, well, then we should at least be left without excuse, right? In that judgment day, what's the Lord, what's he going to say to us? What did you do to stop that great and abominable church from spreading forth its tendrils and its power, right? You know? That whore of all the earth. Okay? So, and ultimately that they might be left without excuse too, right? It goes both ways. If we warn them, if we hold them accountable, if we concert as according to the best we can resistance, then at least we may be left without excuse, and that they may consider and hear and know that they may hear and know which they have never considered. And not only that, but before this analogy or this saying here, I would encourage you to read 101 if you'd like to learn more. D&C 101. Let's go ahead though.
That I may proceed to bring to pass my act, my strange act, and perform my work, my strange work, that men may discern between the righteous and wicked, saith your God.
Now there's a lot of hidden meaning in this, right? Because it doesn't say what exactly that strange act is, or his work, his strange work. That men may discern between the righteous and the wicked and be free. Alright?
What
Maybe
does
that's
strange mean back.
well, it's referring strange. There's actually a footnote on that, on these words here that refers to when David performed his strange act in delivering his people from the Philistines. Okay, from abuses of power.
So miraculous and unexpected.
Yeah. His strange act would be no different than the strange act of Moses, right? Delivering the Israelites from Pharaoh and bringing them through on dry ground. No different from Gideon leading a small army against a great army for their defense. Okay?
That was a lot of skill involved on Gideon's part there, though.
Well, we have an effectual struggle before us, right? I'm not saying it's going to be easy. I'm just saying it's going to be hard. And it starts with us. Okay? No different than that strange act which the Lord brought forth amongst our fathers to be free from the yoke of bondage of their mother country, right? So what did they do? Well, they importuned at the feet of their leaders. And after that, they were left without excuse. And God did bring to pass his strange work. Today we have similar, yet the same duty. Yeah.
I was thinking about this topic. I was reading about the 1830s, 1840s, and the efforts made by the church to go to their
To be free from,
governors, or
right.
congressmen, or the president, Madison, Tyler, asking for redress or assistance, and they'd be turned down or told to go back and talk to the local
Yeah, but, you know,
legislators.
Governor Ford wasn't that helpful, was he?
That this retribution or whatever may not happen in this life.
Well, yeah, it's according to.
Because I guess there's an overriding principle, and that is the idea that there must be opposition in all things, that they be balanced in a way so that God's not really going to put his thumb on the scale and interfere more than he does, I guess what I said. Because the opposition stands and is not destroyed in our lifetime, but it continues on as an opposition against the, let's say, the restoration of the gospel. But the work goes on.
Exactly. Remember to close out.
I guess I would say too, and that is that we think that maybe what's going on is worse than ever, or it's getting worse and worse. But when you look back 150 to 200, 150 more years back, it was just as Wild West and lawless, or maybe more so than now. That people, your elected officials won't help you because, well, I'll lose my votes.
Right.
This here, or I'll, or go along with the mob rule because it's popular.
I mean, the war of heaven has continued today,
Yeah.
right? And if we were to be set free, we would still not be free from that opposition and power of. But to close out, let's read this. Okay. Okay? Probably the most beautiful phrase or the beautiful statement of liberty in the Book of Mormon. Let's start at 25 and, well, I'll just read it. For it cometh to pass that whoso buildeth it up, the secret combination, okay, that power and authority to usurp, right, seeketh to overthrow the freedom of all lands, nations, and countries. And it bringeth to pass the destruction of all people, for it is built up by the devil, who is the father of all lies, even that same liar who beguiled our first parents. Yea, even that same liar who hath caused man to commit murder from the beginning, and hath hardened the hearts of men, that they have murdered the prophets, and stoned them, and cast them out from the beginning. Wherefore I, Moroni, am commanded to write these things, that the evil may be done away, that we may learn and know of our great and awful situation before us, that we may work for our own liberty, right, in Christ, to fulfill our covenants, to act and not to be acted upon, and that the time may come that Satan may have no power upon the hearts of the children of men, that they may be persuaded to do good continually, that they may come unto the fountain of all righteousness and be saved. Brothers and sisters, I know without a doubt that it is our obligation before Christ and before heavenly hosts, before our ancestors, to not go calmly into that good night, but to assert our liberties and freedoms in the face of those who would take it from us with their armies and powers. Right? Let us have an eye to the blessings and the glory which will be bestowed upon us in these moments. Right? The Lord doth most gloriously save his people when the opposition is at its greatest. So let us do as Madison directs. Let us do as Moroni directs. Let us do as all of our prophets have done to seek the liberty of our people. And I encourage you, all of you, to study and learn these things for yourself, that you may know that they're true, and that we may come unto the fountain of all righteousness and be saved. And I say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Okay. Thank you. We went 12 minutes over. I'm sorry. Who wants to say the closing prayer?